Welcome to Michael Uhila Presents. I'm your host, Michael Uhila. Behind every artwork, there's an artist. And as Pablo Picasso once said, art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. That artist, the artist tonight and the artwork is Sally Rayn. Sally, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
All right, I appreciate you being here. And we want to first start off from the beginning. When were you born?
I was born in the 1960s during the Flower Children era.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Virginia. My dad worked in Washington, D.C. So.
Okay. And let's talk about like your first influence from art in the art medium and who inspired you.
Who inspired me? Well, I always loved coloring books.
Okay.
So I would, and I loved Walt Disney and cartoons. I think a lot of my color influences actually come from Walt Disney.
Okay.
The old ones. But the person who most influenced me was my grandmother.
Your grandmother.
Yeah, she was an artist. She did oil paintings, very realistic landscapes and portraits. And I used to spend a lot of time as a child. She would babysit my sisters and and so her whole house smelled like turpentine and oil, and I loved the smell, and I really enjoyed watching her paint.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do you have a sort of can you show us something
Oh,
about
yeah,
that?
I have
you brought
a
something.
story from my grandmother.
Let me get a close-up of this.
When I was 6 years old, my grandmother said, you can have one of the paintings that she'd painted. And so I picked this one. I just loved the ocean and Vikings, and I loved it. And it was the one painting in her studio that she didn't want me to choose because I think it was her best, and I picked the best one. But I insisted because she said it was my 6th birthday present, and so I ended up getting it. And then I added a few little touches myself. I added some glitter.
You added some glitter to that.
My mother was not happy when
She
I
didn't
added
like
the
when
glitter.
you added the glitter?
But yeah, so this was my first painting that I ever collected, was from my grandmother when I was 6.
Okay, and then now you're born in the flower child era. And
Yes.
like if people, you got a shot of this? It's very flowery, pastels. Explain how that got to help you be where you are as a painter.
Well,
Influential, that's the word.
yeah, I think mostly, I've just always loved colors. When I was growing up, we moved from the East Coast to South Africa. My dad was transferred there. He was a computer executive, and he started a branch of a computer company there.
Right.
And so we traveled a lot there. And in South Africa, the people have absolutely gorgeous fabrics, and they paint the walls of their houses very bright colors with geometric patterns. And so I think I was really influenced by that. And we had like blankets that were just absolutely beautiful work. And so that was some of my early influences.
As far as painting, like an engineer has to go to school for engineering, a writer has to go to school for writing. What about painting? What kind of training did you get, or what did you receive to help you get where you are today?
Well, looking back on my life, I didn't know it at the time, but when I was in high school, we took classes, and I knew that I wanted to go to Stanford University. And
you just knew you wanted to go to Stanford.
Okay. I did, and I ended up going there.
You did go to, okay.
I did. But during high school, that meant I had to do everything they told me to do, and I had to do it right, and I had to remember it. And so I did all of the reading. And then during the classes, they just talk about what we read, which I already knew. So I spent the time taking my pen, my ballpoint pen, and going over the lines on the binder paper so that you couldn't see the lines. You couldn't tell that somebody, except for it was a different color.
Right.
And so that was my initial training, and it actually, the straight lines that I can paint now and draw, I think were
that was part of your
because
training,
I
right?
I spent hours and hours doing that. It just was something to do during class that wasn't against the rules.
And so when you went to Stanford,
Right.
what are some of the classes that you took that then pushed that that training you had with the tracing and the into like, okay, we're moving up from,
I took classes in different media. The most important one, I think, was a charcoal drawing class
Okay.
and a figure drawing class. I really love charcoal, and most of my earlier pieces before I started painting with acrylics are in charcoal or pastels, which are colorful dry medium.
Right.
And so that was a very influential class. I considered being an art major, but I didn't like having people tell me what to paint.
What to paint.
Or assignments where I had to fit what I was doing, and I was already painting in a similar way to this when I was, started school
Right.
at college. And so I just decided to study art history and get a good background in languages.
Right.
And I ended up going to Berlin because I ended up being a German studies major.
Okay.
So
So
I
you go to
learned-
Berlin, you're still painting.
Right.
And what happens there?
I met an art history professor named
Okay.
Franz Neckenig. He was at the Stanford and Berlin program, and he had such a unique way of looking at society and nature and the artist and how they influence each other, and that everything is dependent on where you live and what the era you live in, and how art sort of builds on itself from historical processes, so you can interpret different people in art history according to what's happened before them and the time that they're living in.
Okay.
And he was really influential. He introduced me to Kandinsky, who is a very colorful painter, and also the thoughts of Carl Jung, who's a psychologist, lots of dream symbols and sort of collective unconscious writing. So he was very influential to me.
Well, that leads to the next question about stream of consciousness. A lot of artists talk about the muse, and I'm not really hip to a lot of that stuff. So I just, what would you, like a stream of consciousness, other people call it brainstorming or think tank. How does that work with you in your,
Well,
like when you're sitting at home having
right.
breakfast, Scooby snacks, do you just come up with this idea or?
no,
how does
I generally don't come up with an idea. Sometimes I have a color scheme,
Okay.
or I will have, like, I want to paint a tree, like this one behind us.
Right.
Is obviously a tree. It's a redwood tree. I live where there are redwood trees and lots of trees. So I wanted to paint something of the colors that I see around me. But I don't have an idea. I don't have the full painting in my mind before I start.
Yes.
And as far as the muse goes, my motto is just squeeze the tube.
Squeeze the tube.
Squeeze the tube. If I squeeze the paint out, then I use it and I'll paint. I don't like to waste paint, so I have a lot of little paintings.
Let's
Like
get a
this
shot
is
of this right
this
here.
is a little painting that I did because I had leftover paint.
Okay.
So I paint on small boards,
All right.
and that's part of what I do. But
Like if
so-
I was decorating my house, where would you recommend I put this?
oh, I don't know. Kind of looks like a tile. I've considered creating tiles, but
Okay.
I have frames that you can put these in
All
that
right.
are a little bit bigger. I don't know, kitchen.
Kitchen. Okay.
If you have a lot of stainless steel in your kitchen, it would go well.
All right. Let me just tell the people, welcome. This is Michael Uhila Presents. Tonight we have Sally Rayn. She's talking about her artwork. And as you can see in the studio, yes, there's artwork in here.
There's a lot
And
of art.
there's a lot of art. And Sally's here to tell us a little bit about her work. Now, you say you lived in a forest, and so you're a product of your environment, right? You paint what you see.
A lot of times.
A lot of times.
Yeah,
And so,
I think so.
and tell us a little bit about how that works. Or is you just walking around, or do you have like a sketchbook, like writers have, like a notepad? What do painters walk around with?
Sometimes, well, if I'm sitting like in a meeting, I'll sketch while
Okay.
I'm listening. I find I listen better. I mean,
Okay.
I did that through lectures in college, and that's how I developed a lot of my styles. And I started seeing pictures in the doodles that I was doing, and I
Okay.
decided to pursue that
Right.
in other medium. But
What's the most
Yeah.
difficult? Like you have watercolor, right? Let's talk about watercolor first.
well, I've done a little bit of watercolor, just sort of a wet on wet technique. It looks kind of like tie-dye. I have not that much patience for realistic painting
Right.
and watercolor. That takes a lot of training and
Takes a lot of
practice.
training and practice.
Definitely.
Now let's move to charcoal now.
Charcoal.
Charcoal. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I really like the way it feels, and I love you can have many different shades of gray.
Okay.
I like to do, there's different hardnesses as well. There's a really hard where you can do sharp lines, very soft that looks, shiny almost.
Right.
And I like it because I like to work with lots of colors, but more of the symbols that I create and the symbols that I see in my art come through in the black and white because it's just simpler to process. You don't have to deal with all the colors as well as the lines and shapes.
Actually, we have some JPEGs of that. We're probably going to show that.
Yeah, in a little bit.
A little bit. So now we go from watercolor, you don't do much, charcoal, now oil.
No, I've never used oil paints. I like acrylics. They dry quickly. They're very easy to use. They don't smell.
Okay.
Well, apparently the newer ones are very low odor, but I like acrylics.
You like
colors.
acrylic.
That's what I use.
So let's go back for a moment. Let's say from now, how long have you been painting?
I started my very first pastel painting was in 1982.
1982.
1982 was my first one, and that in this style.
In this style.
Yes.
Okay. So let's go back to some of my questions. You received a grant, and a lot of times painting, and I hear a lot from artists, I gotta pay the bills.
Right.
So
Definitely.
What are some things that, maybe suggestions to other artists?
Well, the grant that I got was called the Adolf and Esther Gottlieb Foundation Individual Support Grant. And I did a lot of research, and it was really the only one that I could find that just gives artists money. You don't have to have a project, you don't have to have a fiscal sponsor or nonprofit organization.
What about a budget?
No, it's just an award, but you have to have a 20-year portfolio, photographs of your art over a 20-year period, and write a 3-page essay about your art and your philosophy. And then you also have to need the money. Send in your tax returns. So I won the award right after I finished paying for my daughter's college education, and I wrote a little note saying, well, neither one of us are in debt because of the college experience, but all my savings is now gone.
Oh, okay.
And they gave me the money. I couldn't believe it.
So, okay. Well, it's based on necessity, right? You need to survive. You got to pay the bills. You got to eat. So, and it's challenging. Economics and it's volatility.
And I wrote, the essay I wrote about was my style, dynamic symbolism is what I call it.
Dynamic symbolism.
Yeah, and it's, like this is one of the tree series paintings, the one behind me. That's, as I said, a redwood.
Okay.
And then I brought some JPEG images that show another tree, one that I actually just finished. It's a madrone tree. You can
see if we're ready with
those.
that. JPEG, there we go.
So this is the first structure that I did. I knew I wanted to do a tree, and I knew I wanted to create a madrone tree, but I didn't know any more than this when I started.
Okay.
And then I painted some more. I started with browns, and I have a metallic copper color in there that I really like the metallics.
Okay.
And then I went out and looked at madrone trees and found that they have green underneath. Their bark kind of peels off, and there's a beautiful green. So I picked that green. And then I took photographs, and I did some video of madrone, and I added more leaves. And then I started at the bottom there, I started seeing kind of sharp, pointy leaves right before the irises came out in my yard. So I decided to put in irises at the bottom. And after looking at this has been finished maybe a couple of weeks now. I'm starting to see like animals in the leaves and things like that.